using vlookup. Let's say that we have a list of about 100 students. All we have is their name, last name and first name, but we need their student ID, phone, and email. And that information is contained in this bigger list of 20,000 students. So instead of scrolling down and picking out the information, we'll use vlookup to find the information for us. In order for vlookup to work properly, we need at least one piece of data to match between the two lists. And in this instance, we have last name and first name in this list, and we have last name and first name in this list. But note that last name and first name is in one column in this list, and it's in two columns in this list. So we would need to either split this up into two columns using text to columns, or we'll put these two columns together using concatenate. Let's use concatenate. I'm going to add a space here, insert, and we'll call this new column name. And the concatenate formula is going to be equal B2 ampersand, open quotes, comma, close quotes, ampersand, open quotes, space, close quote, ampersand, C2. Hit enter to finish the formula. And now we have last name, comma, space, first name. And now we'll use copy relative to copy this all the way down. We select this cell, hover our mouse over the fill handle at the bottom right till it turns into crosshairs, then left click and drag all the way down. And note how Excel understood that we wanted the formula to apply to the next row down each time. So now this is in the same format as the other table. Now we don't need this data anymore, but if I delete it, it will affect this because this is actually a formula. Even though we see student comma 1, what's actually in the cell is a formula pointing to these cells. So we need to copy this information into a value so it's no longer a formula. So I'm going to left click in the name block, hold down my shift key, and then press my down arrow until I get to the end of my data. Then in the middle of the data, I'll right click, select copy. Then in the home tab, in the clipboard group, under paste, I'll click the drop down. Under paste values, I'll select the first one. And now it pasted the exact value. And if we look up here in the formula window, we can see it's no longer a formula, but the exact value. Now we can get rid of these two cells. I'm selecting them, right click, delete. The next thing we need to do to make sure vlookup works properly is to make sure our data is in the same order. And normally you want your like data or your matching data to be on the far left side. So I'm going to grab this app column. I left click at the top of the column, hover my mouse over the line till it turns to crosshairs. Then I'm going to drag this over here, let go. Then I'll move the B column over here to the far left. And I'll delete this extra space here. So now I have the order, name, student ID, phone, email. So I need to do the same thing on the other list. I'll enter a space here. Then I'll grab student name and drag it to the far left. And let's enter a couple of more spaces. So I'll grab student ID and email. Now we have name, student ID, phone, email here in the partial list. And in the bigger list, name, student ID, phone, and email. So let's start a vlookup. And we'll start with the first set of data we want to fill in, which would be student ID. And we'll use the function helper this time. We could type it from scratch. We could use the formula information here, or we can use the function editor or formula editor here. I'm going to click that, and I'll do a search for vlookup. Go. And then there's vlookup. I'll click OK. Now the function helper walks us through the process. It's asking for data for this block, and it explains what it should look like over here, and there's more details here on the bottom. But basically, it's going to be the leftmost information, and it's going to be the value that's the same between the two sheets. And normally we start at the partial list. So I could type A2 or I could point to A2 to reduce the chance of errors. So I'll look up value. We start with A2. The table array will be all the information from the full list. So I'll click in this block. Then I'll click in the full list, which is titled all. And the table array would be A1 through D. And then we have, like I said, about 20,000 records. So it's like A1 through D, 20,000 something. And I'm holding down my shift key. And I'm selecting everything here. And we'll go down to about 12,000 since it's just for demo purposes. But normally you want to copy the entire list or select the entire list. And now column index number, that means where is the data that I'm going to match. And if you look back over here at the full data, we're looking for student ID right now, and that's in the second column, because here's the A column is the first one, the second column is the student ID, so we type the number 2 in this block. And now this is asking for true or false, and basically if we type false or 0, that means we want an exact match. If we type true, that means it could look for like a partial match or something that looks like it, and it explains that here. I'm going to type a 0 because I want it to be exact, and notice that it changed it to false. And notice here equals 8,000. That's a student ID there, or 8 and several zeros there. So we know that this information is going to come out right. If we get like a weird thing here or something in red, then we know we may have done the formula wrong. I'm going to click OK. Now we can check to make sure the formula worked. We have 8 with several zeros here in the partial list, and that pulled information from the full list, 8 and several zeros. So now it's time to copy all this information down. And before we use the copy relative, this is going to be partially relative and partially absolute before we start copying. So we want A to be absolute. And by the way, stay tuned for more information on relative versus absolute copying. But I'm going to make the A column absolute with a $sign. But 2 will stay relative, so I'll leave that alone. And then the entire array is also absolute. But instead of adding in dollars everywhere, I'm just going to select the entire thing here. And then I'll press F4. So that makes that portion of the data absolute. I'll press enter. And we still get the 8 and several zeros. But now we can copy the information successfully. Note the field handle at the bottom right. I'll left click and drag. Now we see the information is filled in. Note that I have an NA for student 2. So we don't have a student 2 over here. So that means the NA is working properly. If we had a student 2 and we got NA over here, then we know we need to tweak our formula. Also student 12, we got NA. And student 12 doesn't exist over here. Of course, we got about 20,000 names here. So to double check, I can type Control F. Do a search for student, comma, space, 12. Find. And notice it found the 120 because that's partially, or 12 is part of that. But no student 12. Now some other issues you might run into. If you have a list of students, you might have someone with the exact same name, but they should have different IDs. So this is the kind of thing you have to look at and tweak after you're finished with your formula. And of course, if we had information that was unique between the students, then you wouldn't have this issue. But this still saves a little bit of time. The other issue you might run into, and you'll need to double check for, if you have double names on this side, it might return improper information on this side. So just double check the info. So next we want phone. So we'll start with our formula. And I'm going to just drag it all the way over here to the right hand side. And this time, instead of the second column, which is student ID, we're going to tell it to pull information from the third column, which is phone number, column C. So in my data here, I'm going to change this 2 to a 3. Hit enter, and notice now it shows the phone. 0823 086, etc. 0823 086, etc. And then we'll left click and drag down and let go. Then there's our phones. And once again, if the information is missing on the other sheet, it's also missing here. Now for email, I'll copy the formula once more. And I'll give you a minute to think about what I need to change in this formula to make it look for email in the other list. That's right, we need to change this 3 to a 4 because email is the 4th in the column on the other sheet. And then here's our email. And I just use email 1 for all of those in the other sheet, so we won't really be able to check the email address to make sure it's correct. Now, of course, you still need to do something with these NAs. So what if we want to get all of those together in one sheet? Let's filter them out. We can go to data, the data tab, click the filter icon. In the drop down, we can choose student, phone, or email. All of them have NA in them, or the ones that do have NA, they're all match. Click the drop down, uncheck select all, check NA. Okay, and now we have just the data that has NA listed. So I'm going to left click in the first block here, or first cell, hold down my shift key, and I'm using my down and right arrows to select all of this information. Control C to copy, plus to create a new sheet, Control V to paste, and then here's all the information that I still need to double check, or maybe I need to manually look this up. Or I could actually, if we wanted to, we could delete this information. Right click, delete. So now we have one clean sheet with all the data in it that we want, and one sheet with the missing stuff that we still need to look up. And once we look up that information and get the right data, we can always incorporate it back. We can just right click, copy, and then paste it onto the bottom of the correct sheet. Control V to paste. Actually, we don't need that header row there. I'll right click and hit delete. Let's talk about this vlookup formula a little bit more. Now that you have it made, you don't have to make it every time you have a new list to look up. As long as your list is going to be in the same format or same order, you can just copy this formula to your next new list. Here's your formula. Formulas always start with an equal, and vlookup is the name of the formula. If the formula was horizontal instead of vertical, it would be hlookup. A2 is the first empty column in your partial set of data, and the $ means absolute for column A, and we leave 2 relative. All with an exclamation point, that's a naming convention, meaning you're pulling data from a separate sheet, and I happen to name the separate sheet all. The name could be anything, but I named the sheet that had all the data all, and I named the sheet that had partial data. In this instance, it's named empty. So since I'm pulling the data from a separate sheet, it has the exclamation point. So anything after all exclamation point is coming from that sheet. So we see A1 through D 12,000. That means that that's the table array coming from the sheet that has all the data. So A1 would start there, D1 starts here, and then we scroll all the way down to 12,000 or 20,000, or however many rows or columns we have there. And the colon here means through. It means A1 through D 12,728. The 2 is the second column from the filled in data. So 2 would be column B. And the 0 means true or false. So the 0 means false, and false means that the data is exact. You don't want just partially matching data. And here's one more look at the details of the formula. Let's test reusing the formula with new data. Let's say I have a partial list named school and a full list named SASS. I'll copy the formula. I'll paste the formula. And notice it's not working now because it's looking for a list called ALL. But since my list now is called SASS, I'll select ALL, and over it I'll type SASS, enter. And now the data fills in.